do you think? Maybe I'll begin my introduction. So thank you all for joining on a very sunny Saturday, where if you're in the UK, the high streets, I think, are opening for the first time fully, which is really exciting. And welcome to the MA City's second public lecture on the theory and practice of the commons. I'm Diana Ibanez-Lopez. I think most of you know me, course leader of MA Cities, the newest course at Central St. Martin's in the Spatial Practices programme, which launched in January. We're looking this spring at the mechanisms and histories of collaborative practice in cities. And Dr. Daniel Fitzpatrick, who's a researcher, teacher, practitioner, activist of the urban commons, is the coordinator for our second module. He's invited Dr. Marina Chang to give this second lecture, and I'm going to hand over to Daniel to introduce Marina and the topic.
So welcome everyone. I'm the co-leader of Unit 2 for the MA Cities program. Welcome you this morning. Thanks, Diana, for your introduction. The Unit 2, as some of you know, is focused on the idea of community and collaboration. I met Marina Chang many years ago when we were both doing research on the commons, and I was approaching it and using the sort of framework of the commons to look at housing in London, and Marina was looking at food and sort of food systems and food networks, and our sort of shared frames of reference and theoretical questions that we had around cooperativism and collaboration and commons, as well as how to enact the commons and how to put them into practice, we were tussling with at the time. And we did this through reading groups, and we'd set up the cooperative reading group. But I really admired Marina for the variety of approaches that she had to her research. I tended to go to the library and read books and read theory, and Marina was out there organizing things and doing her research through a range of collaborative practices that I always really admired and found fascinating, from meeting her down at a new Covent Garden market at 6 in the morning to get waste food to make food with, to her projects making recipe books with I think 100 collaborators, to organizing a series of food festivals and food workshops with different communities around London. And I think her interest in both how to do research and the sort of questions of the research have continued. And now Marina Chang's based at the Coventry University at the Centre for Agroecology, Food and Resilience. I really wanted to invite her to talk about her current research and her current thoughts, especially with regards to the sort of theory that we have around the commons and cooperative practices that we sort of use as these frameworks that can be quite nebulous and quite idealistic, and then really seeing how they can apply to very particular situations in the city. And I think Marina sort of juggles these interests at the very sort of local level, always with this lens of looking at what communities are facing, what communities experience within cities, through this lens of food originally. And she's now currently sort of doing another project related to food, seeing that where food comes from. So it's opening up to look at the food systems as a commons, looking, and one of her projects is linked to heritage seeds, and this is sort of the origins of where our food came from originally, and bringing it into the city, into the urban, and looking at how communities through their sort of local practices are able to create some form of commons. So thank you very much, Marina, for joining us, and I'll hand over to you and look forward to your hearing about your current work.
First of all, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Diana. I'm very pleased to be here to meet the students and researchers or anybody who is interested in food and as a commons. And in particular, I would like to share some of my kind of practical experience and how the theory of commons inspired my practice, and also the practice feedback to my rethinking and reflection about how commons evolved and commons can be produced and commons can be sustained. So let me share my screen. Can everybody see it?
Yeah.
So let me. So the topic title is Thinking the Theory and Practice of Commons. And so I would like to just introduce a couple of sections I would like to talk about in this format, the different perspective of commons and notion of care. And I want to talk about one particular case study in the local area. Actually, it's very close to Central St. Martin. It's like a 15 minutes walk. So if you're around the city, welcome to visit us. And then have some ideas how the commons in theory and practice, how the reflection I have based on my last few years experience and research and practice, and indicate some future research. So first of all, how I have started. So I, first of all, like Daniel was talking about, I did my degree at UCL for mastering and PhD. And in my PhD, during my PhD time, I have organized a number of university public engagement events. And through food festival, engaging with different local food initiatives, and for movements, working with activists and community organizers, and also producing a cookbook. And the idea of commons is really started from my voluntary work in Brixton with my supervisor at the time, and working in a social housing estate to transform the green grass space into a productive, thriving, growing space. And that is how I started to learn. You can see the two images. So people working together in for a piece of land, and collaboratively, collectively trying to transform the urban landscape into something from wasteland to become much more productive. It's an interesting initiative, an interesting intervention to get people to start to think what's our relationship with land and with the piece of space, and how we are able to imagine that, and how we're able to exercise our agency to work on the small piece of land. So that is how I started to think about all these issues about sharing, about ownership and collaboration and sustainability. And on the right-hand side is during the study, the notion of the earth is a common threshold for all. So that is starting from the diggers in this country, in the UK. And what do we mean by the earth is a common threshold for all is an interesting, another interesting starting point. So I always believe as an academic, I am thinking I'm part of a community and the community is part of a university. So the vision of community university collaboration is always my kind of vision and starting point for me to exercise different kinds of forms of collaboration and collaboration and agent for change. So it's a very important point. We are the changing agents. So it's not always sitting there study in the library, but how we transform our knowledge into practice for change. So that is, we talk about the festival and the food pass, food junction, food pass, and the cookbook is a series of events, and using that as a way to understand and to deepen our theoretical thinking as well as practical skills and knowledge. So now I would like to briefly introduce a different perspective of commons. Actually, there are many, many different theories and different approach to understanding the notion of commons. Today, I'll just introduce a number of them. I think it's quite useful, pertinent to our engagement with the notion of commons. So the commons, we talk about probably what do we mean by the commons. So the very interesting seminal article by the scholar Harding in the 1968, the tragedy of commons. So why the commons is a shared resources, open source resources are disappearing. So his kind of contribution or his theory, so the commons cannot be organized by the community group. We have to have the regulation, either have the state regulation, the government, or the market privatization. That is the only way to keep the scarcity or kind of open access to commons. So if we are not looking at those regulating or privatizing those resources, we are facing the decline of the commons. So that is the tragedy of the commons in the 80s, 60s. But if we look at the whole world, so this Elinor Ostrom saying, no, probably we think the tragedy of commons is the only way to look at the commons. Actually, there are many other possibilities. If you look at the different parts of the world, the fishermen, the pastoral, the mountains or land, there are a lot of initiatives and in a lot of communities or territories actually looking after their commonly poor resources together collectively, self-organizing how to organize their rules and their ways, and how they share the facilities and tools and knowledge. So it actually is not only the tragedy of commons, actually there are many ways to see and to discover the commons. So he was one of the earliest or the only one Nobel Prize for Economics who is a woman. And the very famous kind of contribution is the institutional, what kind of institutional conditions and to govern, to manage the commons. So she won the Nobel Prize for that contribution. And so she said, I'll just give you a few quotes. She said, what we just ignore is citizens and ordinary people can do, and the importance of real involvement of the people, engage with the resources they are facing and they are sharing in order to manage that well and collectively, as well as kind of collaborate and collaboratively. And so we can say the forest, water system, fishery, and many other resources, natural resources, are the importance of the humans in the earth, in the planet. And on the bottom right, there's she and her husband, Vincent and Elinor Ostrom.
Marina, you're on mute.
Oh, probably I pressed the button, sorry.
Okay.
So it's interesting, they said the comments, the workshop they have in the university set up a workshop in political theory and policy analysis. Actually, Ostrom is a very skillful woodwork, is a carpenter. And she said, every artisan skills and knowledge are very important, the embodied engagement of how you organize things. So she brings that idea to university. So she is a carpenter, very skillful carpenter, but also a very skillful scholar. And what she's doing, it's a workshop instead of saying a classroom. So the environment is like the artisan, you're a baker, you're a carpenter, you're a food grower, a farmer, using your hand, your body, as well as your mind and your head. So that is an interesting connotation of a workshop. So she divided through her enormous research across the whole continent, different continents and different communities around the globe. She kind of synthesized or summarized all different kind of conditions and contexts, and summarized the very important principles, how to govern the commons. So these are very interesting principle for us to learn. For example, the boundary of users and resources are very clear, and the benefit and cost has to be coherent, and who are the users, and whether they are able to make their rules and to practice the room and monitor room. And as the next one is monitor rooms. And if people don't follow the rules, what can they do? So the graduated sanctions or the some kind of ways to deal with the disobedience of the rules, and how to resolve the conflict, and using a very low cost way rather than a complicated and very expensive way. And then their existence and their way of being and doing things are recognized by the government, by the authority. And the last one is that how these commons, you have a shared resources, is water or fishery or land or seeds. And when you grow, you have this group of users, of the commoners, and they are able to provide and monitor and sanction all this, the 1 to 7, and in a very nested structure with multiple layers and activities and actors. So they are kind of, it's almost like from the small scale, but open it up. So because they'll engage with different networks and different actors and different organizations. So how these people and different organizational groups are able to work out their own ways to define good practice and to sustain that practice and to improve through time. So that is her very famous design principle for governing the commons. So, however, the commons, we talk about the kind of natural resources, common pool resources, what Ostrom was doing in her research. But recently, probably the last 2-3 decades, we found out that the notion of commons is not only for those natural resources. Actually, there are many other commons, as Daniel pointed out in the beginning, saying people using, his research is housing as commons, and my research is about food as commons. But these are the commons, the notion of commons has been kind of evolved or become a broader scope of a notion. So the different from the traditional natural resources, and probably not so much boundary-wise. You can't define the boundary. For example, the commons of culture as commons, or knowledge as commons, or the urban commons. So all these things become much more broadly engaged and developed. So that can be, people can protecting the commons from inclusion, or producing new commons through networks and collaboration, or even the commons as a pedagogical device. So it's a learning and it's a new way of doing things collaboratively. So boilers, when we talk about the wealth of the commons, the world beyond marking estates. So that is much kind of elaborative notion saying a social regime to manage shared resources and forging a community of shared values and purpose. So that is a very big understanding, much wider scope in terms of the commons and how that related to our society and community. So he was using the commons and the resources we share, and the commoning is the verb, is an action, actually the process of doing sharing resources and developing rules and norms and how we are able to work together. And the commoners, so the commoners refer to those people who are involved in that process and action. That is a kind of different way of than the natural resources. Okay, so then the recent, this is the Armstrong institutional commons, the common pool resources and natural resources. And then we kind of expands to different kinds of ways and in which and structure, ways and organizational mode in order to manage and govern the commons. But there are some criticism or challenges from more radical or more kind of anti-capitalist approach. So one of them is Graffiti saying the historical roots, the commons enclosure, or as we said in the beginning of the diggers. So that is the time the UK actually been through the enclosure. So the historical roots, and it's always try to enclose and exploit the commons. So how that relevant or compatible to the world, which is dominantly governed by the capitalistic mode of production. And so they were thinking whether the commons can be studied like a firm, a company, saying that how you govern the commons is looking at a company. So it's a appropriate way to look at it, because it seems to ignore the class, the gender, the class and struggle, as well as the clash. So how we're able to deal with those challenges. And Robert Beale talking about it's good to emphasize human nature, human has innate capacity, have the capacity and ability to self-organize and self-governing of the shared resources. That is perfect. However, we need to understand the basic conditions. For example, if you are not able to be fed healthily and sustainably, how you're able to exercise your agency, and how the community are able to self-organize. So there are certain basic fundamental conditions in order for us to come together to exercise the capacity to organize commons. And secondly, there's a lot of people, for example, using the commons as a way to co-opt the sustainable community, because community doing things kind of very effectively, and then the states can withdraw a lot of resources not to support people, because they understand community can support themselves, so that the state can withdraw many benefit from the original state-led kind of infrastructure. So how we are able to be careful not to be co-opted by the notion of commons, producing commons, and let a community do their work, and the states kind of laissez-faire withdraw their engagement. And also how we are able to, another one is how we are able to develop a new vision, the kind of alternative, not only criticize it, actually proposing and developing a new version of the way of living, alternative to capitalist approach. So and Angelia talking about the common discourse empower anti-capitalist to claim the beginning history or the something outside the capitalist world. So instead of aiming for an utopia, actually by doing that, the action of commoning, as we said, is a way. So every struggle through an alternative non-capitalist form of social organization. So he emphasized how we are able to exercise our agency and exercise our through struggle, we are able to advance the notion of commons as a way to as an alternative way to capitalism. So I try to kind of give the summarize. So you have the natural commons in Armstrong's original contribution, and you have a new commons on the left. So there's a different notion of commons emerging. And thirdly is the capitalistic world. So not only focusing on the small kind of local level and how that expanded to the society, to the nation, as well as to the global levels, because as we say, the nested enterprises. So we always have the internal and external forces that will impact on the development and growth of commons. So the three of them, I think we are able to be complementary, using the different perspective to look at the situation, and that is the lens, the tools for me to see where I can get inspiration, source of inspiration. And I would. Diana was talking about the first lecture is something to do with care. I will also want to say a few words of the notion of care in relation to the commons. First of all, I would like to talk about food as a commons. So food is a very important theme in common studies. So the commons, we talk about the tangible things, the land, the seeds, the plants, the river, the water, and the facilities and tools or technology, and even the data. And you have intangible. So what is our food culture, how we cook food and how we eat together, what's the ritual, and what is the knowledge and heritage. All these things, intangible, are also part of the shared resources as a commons. So the commons, as we said, on the one hand, it's the tangible material side, but also the new commons and the knowledge, the culture, as well as the heritage and the memory as well. And so the commons can connect food and the farming system. So the farming system, agroecology as a way of to advance the alternative notion of industrial unsustainable food production. So agroecology is one way. And the social system, how we're able to provide the enabling conditions to allow those production and practice to emerge, to sustain, and to flourish. So the social system, in terms of the policy, in terms of education, in terms of emphasize, and all these ways are the underpin how we are able to produce food more sustainably, and the system, how the production, distribution, consumption, and waste, and all hand in hand. So food is food as a common has this kind of bridging entity, so connecting the material and immaterial parts of the world. And Escobar, in our reading, we talk about commoning and commons is a kind of umbrella and bridge to, we have a common interest to advance or to develop a better sustainable food system at a global level, from the local to global. So the struggle for food and farming system towards sustainability itself is a commons. So the notion of care, so in the literature, there are quite a few references, research talking about care in our food systems. So we have the politics of care, or the geography of care, caring economy, and care-based design principles, or care and spirituality. And all these things are very important, the care. So when we talk about commons, and the commons underpinned by a caring values and practice. And it also relates to the indigenous perspective and ancient traditions, in the sense like the worldview is very different from the humankind is apart from nature. No, the indigenous perspective is human beings are integral part of nature, and it's interconnectedness that's kind of embodied in their practice. So like Chinese Taoism, Indian Swaja, or Bon Vivia, and Africa Ubuntu, all these kind of different notions, they have different contexts and history. But something in common is our relationship. Common ground is our relationship between humankind and nature, so in harmony between nature and humankind. So in the I would like to introduce the care. So the care on top is the care recipients. Who do we care? So the humans' life, the living entities. So not only humans, also animal, plants, and other living entities, and society and ecology, the environment and history. So as we said, a lot of things, we're not only looking at the contemporary context, we need to look at the historical roots and the world. And the bottom, there are a number of key values: that democracy, justice, diversity, coexistence, and aesthetics. So through this more comprehensive, holistic understanding of the care, then we are able to look at the care-based food as a commons. So a couple of years ago, the UNFAO called for a new paradigm of food system. So in my research, I proposed a care-based commons food regime as a new paradigm for food and agricultural system, with a new cosmovision that we're talking about the humankind and nature in harmony, and a decolonial and pluriverse agenda. So the pluriverse is not only about one kind of worldview, because at the moment we are our perspective are dominated by the scientific revolution, enlightenment, and Western, the European kind of lens of the world. But there are many other parts of the world have different tradition, different wisdom, and different perspective, how they see the world. Like we talk about Ubuntu, the Bon Vivia, and how those non-European perspective can be part of our thinking and practice as part of the commons. So I introduce kind of briefly and very quickly some perspective of commons. And now I would like to introduce a case study, a Calthorpe Community Garden, as a my own embodied engagement and practice, and how I think about all these questions in reality on the ground, and how relevant and whether they are useful or they are sometimes causing problems or obstacles, and how I am able to resolve them or not. So I would like to give you some history about this particular community garden, a bit of history. So it's in Gracing Road in King's Cross in central London. And as I said, this part of the world is very close to Central St. Martin, probably 15 minutes walking distance. And in the 80s, 1982, 84, there was a kind of, as you can see, the picture is very rundown area. At the time, that was surrounded by social housing, a very high concentration of social housing. And this is the only space, kind of green space. And at the time, the London Borough of Camden, the local authority, want to sell the land for development for offices. So the local community, when they know that information, they were really worried. Their very, very precious green spaces will be taken. So they come together, campaign against the local authority. So they work together. So they organize themselves to design and planning their own vision. They didn't have a very clear vision, but they invite people to come along to contribute, to share, exchange their ideas, how this piece of land in the inner city community, how we're able to use it. So fast forward, now after 35 years, this particular land, so they won the campaign in the 80s, and they rescued the space, and then growing different ideas and different initiatives. So the Calthorpe community is not have a master planning. The idea is evolving, it's a patchwork, it's participatory, and different people using the space, they have a say, they have an agency, they are able to engage the space collaboratively to express their interest and needs. So over the last 35 years, the Calthorpe Community Garden has been through different phases. So now you have the growing spaces, you have the community kitchen, you have the football, the exercise, physical exercise, and you have a different kind of allotment, and for people to do different things. So you are able to just relax and chill out, sitting in the garden, sharing your lunch with your friends, or you can participate in different programs from a very, very a very young age to the group of 80 or 90. So it's a kind of very long span working from different walks of life. And so you can see these are different spaces, the shared spaces. People are using the space in their own way, and they what to grow, how to grow, and once the produce is shared, and how to cook a nice meal. So this space developed and to engaged or sustained by different group of people, by volunteers, by the community growers, by the allotment holders, small, medium allotments. And it's interesting to think about, because now this is a place from very informal right from the beginning, now become much more formalized. It's a charity organization. So there are different kind of groups who use the space. You have the member of staff who get salary, who are running the space, and you have volunteers, you have local users, and just enjoy the space. And you also have the community board, the trustee board, who are giving the kind of instructional strategy to be make sure the community is following the charity objectives. So you see, you have all different groups, and so going back to the idea of the commons. So this is the space, and this is the activities run by different group of people. So who are the commoners, and who are the commons, and what is the commoning? So these are the questions we can discuss later. And we have the saying the how to create a different model in the same space. So for example, you can see the cafe using the food produced in the garden, and produce the food waste using the biodigester, and transform the food waste, organic waste, into energy and fertilizer. And the fertilizer, liquid fertilizer, can come to the different growing spaces that can be used, and the growing spaces, the produce going back to the cafe. So we have a kind of circular economy, closed loop system at the community level. I have to say, these are the community initiative made by, it's a DIY project, and all the bits and the facilities are built by the community member in relation to the contribution from university. So UCL, Coventry, and including Central St. Martin, actually at some point contributing to the this new closed loop. And not only at the community level, we are also engaged with other communities. So we think the community shouldn't be alone. The solidarity working with other community is important, because a lot of issues faced by different communities are very similar. So we participate the Growing Food Network across London, and we realized a number of challenges. For example, the access to land, the sustainability of land, and the different resources, scarcity of resources, and the manpower, the knowledge of growing. All these things are very common. So we are part of the a network, informal network called Just Space. So Just Space is a kind of voice, represent a voice across London in terms of the community, grassroots, and individuals who are concerned about London plan, and come together to create this coalition and trying to advocate a different vision and different voices from the community groups. So we try to say Calthorpe is part of that network in terms of the development of the city. The city is not only driven by the corporation or the government. Actually, people living in different parts of the world, different parts of the city, should have the voice, should have the right to the city, have the opportunity to express their interests and needs. And so that is the kind of in terms of the cost internally, and the relationship with the external environment, which is the city as a whole. And now I would like to draw back to another initiative I've been working with. So King's Cross, as we know, is in the kind of transformation. So through, in the 80s, it's 80s, 70s or 80s is a very rundown area, but now it's very booming, very promising, a lot of things happening. And Central St. Martin, the Granary Square, is part of that transformation. And so in terms of food, I was thinking, so we're talking in the city, so the food, this is how we can see in the in King's Cross around that area. So you have different kind of activities and different kind of food and different kind of programs. And so I was thinking, I'm working with farmers who are interested in the heritage grain. And heritage grain is a different kind of grain economy and grain production. But how that in the rural area, the grain, when we eat bread, are we thinking about the bread actually is made by flour, and the flour is milled by grains, and grains kind of produced in the field. So I had coined a new project called the King's Cross project. So it's a way to communicate the future and sustainable grain economies. So the urban developer to consider what you eat, the bread in front of you is something, there are different stages in line in order to produce that piece, that loaf of bread. And the cultural diversity and biodiversity, community bakers are working together to reflect and to celebrate diversity of different the food culture and connecting the rural and the urban space in environment. So we say the King's Cross Fund in Calthorpe, we actually have different parts in 2019, different parts. Most urban developers never see the grains in the field. So we bring that seeds to the city in the community garden. People can see that whole growing cycle. And we also bring community members to the field to look at it when it's almost waiting to be harvested. So you can see the whole grain chain in action. And we also invite different local bakeries from India, from Spain, from Mexico, Argentina, Turkey, and English and Irish. So these are our community bakers using the heritage flour to create a bun that represent their culture, their innovation, and their idea of sustainable food system. So you can see different, they all call King's Cross bun because King's Cross is such a kind of cosmopolitan city and place. And this using the King's Cross bun to kind of celebrate and revitalize that link between the culture and the natural. Talking about food as a commons. And the next one is this is the photo actually taken a couple of months ago. Now the whole scaffolding is all kind of taken away. So the Calthorpe Community Garden actually just behind sharing the wall, the next door is will be the UCL Center for Excellence for Neurology and Dementia Research Institute. So we are sharing the wall, and in the next few years, we are going to have a different kind of transformation for the community and the local environment, local landscape. So through this opportunity, is a threat and opportunity because we are going to suffer, actually we are suffering from the dust and noise from the construction work next door. But we also see that is another way to reimagine the relationship between university and community, how university and community can work together to reflect some important issues. What do we mean by health and well-being, and how we can co-produce the guidelines or the ideas for health and health city and health environment and healthy population. So this is we call this Calthorpe Community Garden partnership with UCL. And also through Just Space involvement, we also did a very pioneer work on the social community impact assessment. What kind of development scheme will impact on the local community next door, short term and long term, and how we can mitigate and transform those kind of damage or potential threat into something new, positive. So we did this kind of community-led social impact assessment, led by the local people, led by the user group, rather than the developer. And well, last year, so we have all the things when the King's Cross found the Heritage Grant, setting up a urban grant hub at Calthorpe Community Garden, and dealing with negotiation, a collaboration, a partnership with UCL Dementia Research Center and wider UCL University. When all these things are happening, we have COVID from last year. So the cafe has to be shut, and we have to do a lot of things in order to keep the garden operates during the pandemic. So one of the things, the Calthorpe's response was immediate, almost no time gap. So when we shut the community cafe, the community workers immediately thought how we're dealing with people who are suffering from food poverty. So instead of doing the community cafe, we use the community cafe, the resources we already built up, to transform it into a community food bank. So we receive a lot of food donation, but that is quite a normal items, kind of cans or pasta or bread, not very, sometimes it's not very healthy. But we have garden, we're producing food, we are quite productive. So we're using that produce as part of the community food bank initiative. So every household received a parcel, have the three items. One is the normal food bank stuff. And then we have a bag of free salad produced by the garden. And we also cooked 2 meals based on the donation, what kind of donation we have. Cooked meal for can be stir fry, can be curry, can be different things, because we recognize a lot of community members who are suffering from food poverty. They don't even have gas or time or resources to cook it. So our community member on the front line, they understand the urgency, the difficulties the community member are facing. So they immediately make that suggestion and run it at a very effective way. So the comments, in a way, it's multiple. So you have people, the labor who are coming together, they're cooking, and they finding different recipes and delivery. So we have a lot of local community members who are actually, this is a place for them to have some fresh air, meeting people and to deliver food. So the mutual aid is so amazingly kind of popular. So people do it without thinking what they feel they are contributing to much wider world. So the idea, the earth is a common, seems to be so natural, so intrinsic, and so spontaneous. So the participation in community-led post-COVID, we are part of the group in Just Space as a response to rethink how these kind of mutual aids and these kind of behaviors and mechanisms and initiatives can be part of the policy in a wider sense in London. So I would like to kind of give you a summarize the Calthorpe model, what I learned from my own practice and the theory and practice. So the community garden is actually existing commons. So the commons is not only the space, it's the material space and the space, the growing space, as well as the facility and tools and the seeds. and also people, the knowledge, how people are able to give a narrative, different discourse, doing things in different ways, and also the process, the commoning. And we also try to integrate different kinds of comments, how we make them coherent. So we say that connecting the dots. So bring together health, exercise, food, rest, relaxation in one space. So in one space is a microcosm of different kind of comments, different kind of engagement. And we think this emerging model is a kind of evolving and spontaneous and very grassroots led, is an important model to be shared and to be developed, and to have a wider implications in the city development. So how we see different ways of doing things and can learn from each other. So I would say that a more holistic approach to food, health, and well-being in the city as well as for the city. So finally, I would like to say a few share some reflections and indicate future studies. So I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot is going back to the notion of the comments, different kinds of, different forms of comment, different types of comments. And then how we are able to recognize what is comments and how we are able to kind of nurture it, and make it more inclusive and more accessible and productive. But again, there's going back to the historical link. So how we're able to actually to consider those people who are not able to have that agency. So the agency is sometimes quite deprived because they are struggling with their life and livelihood. So the decolonial kind of marginalized community, how we're able to look after, care for those people who are not in the normal, who are not able to express or to have the capacity or to have the opportunity. So these are the issues I've been thinking about, the decolonizing. So how we are constantly in the colonial way of thinking. Are we able to see a different world? Are we able to how we can encourage or imagine a different kind of ways of doing things? So these are the conversation I've been working with different community groups to having a dialogue. What does it mean, the colonial lens in terms of comments? And also as academic, the comments is, there's also a notion of under comments. So how am I appropriate the knowledge and skills and resources from the ground and for my own benefits as an academic, or how we're able to support being part of the change to change that system, the environment and condition. So that is the next one. I've been thinking, be the change you want to see in the world has been my kind of reminder. Actually, this photo is taken outside my flat. It's in Tavistock Square, and also very close to Central St. Martin. And I would like to encourage you to visit. So the Gandhi statue is my kind of reflection, how we're able to be the part of the change. And you are the change, and we are the change, and we are the commoners, and how we're able to sustain our company together. And that is something I continues, it's never ending, it's still kind of ongoing, and it's kind of my vision being academic, but academic is also part of the community, the wider community, and we are able to make that link meaningful and sustainable. Thank you. So let's keep in touch, and I would like to hear any comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Marina. I think we have a nice chunk of time to ask questions. And there's a question, there's a Q&A chat bar. So if you can put your questions in there, and we can have a sort of conversation via the question bar. I had a couple of really, I thought you covered a whole gamut of really interesting ideas and things that I hadn't heard before as well, coming from you. And I remember we were sitting a couple of weeks ago in Calthorpe and discussing this idea of how Calthorpe is a sort of hub of activity within itself, but it has these sort of connections outside and acts as a hub for other networks as well. So this idea of, you touch on the idea of there being a sort of closed loop system, but there are arrows coming in and out in that diagram that you showed. And there are arrows coming in and out of the closed loop system. And there's a sort of sense of there being a community of communities as well, working together, sharing ideas, and picking up on one of Ostrom's sort of the final point that Ostrom had in her sort of rules of about having nested systems. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you had any reflections about how to sort of help these nested systems when perhaps they have different languages or different ways of interacting or different forms of, you talk about decolonializing knowledge. So we have sort of the academic language, and we have sort of languages from every field, and sometimes that prevents us from working together. So I wondered if you had any reflections on, especially like, I suppose giving you an example is the relationship of Calthorpe to obviously the local authority, Camden, the UCL as a sort of estate that has its estates, and they all kind of articulate their needs in a different language. So I was wondering if you had any reflections on how to sort of talk through and communicate essentially.
Yeah, I think that's just pick up the word you said about languages. I would kind of make it more to do with the communication. I think the communication is so important, and each entity, organization or stakeholder involved in the closed loop system or the Calthorpe Community Garden in various ways. So there is an entry point, who and how and what they engage with this particular organization and people. So who are they? So they have different agenda, different interests, and different kind of, you talk about language. So they have a very set. So you talk about the policy maker at the local level. It's very different from the Mayor of London, so the City Hall. So we have to constantly change your hat, and in order to fit in the dialogue, who you are talking to as well, but not compromise your own integrity. I think that is the struggle. So you try to be navigating different spaces and trying to find common ground within different groups. And in order to build up trust and build up the caring relations. And I think that the relational aspect of the comments are very important. And it's not one day or 1 week, it's a continuous engagement. And understanding the external changing landscape and changing their perspective, as well as what do they need from you, from this community and from this particular space, and whether we are able to cater for everybody's needs, and what is the priority. So if, for example, I have my own agenda. I have my own vision. I want to make the Calthorpe in certain ways, but my idea not necessarily shared by other group of people. And whether I am able to influence others, or I've been influenced by others. So that is what I mean by commoning. It's an evolving process. It's never ending. It's constant negotiation and trying to find ways to move forward. And also the knowledge, as you said, about the different notion of knowledge. So you have expert knowledge, academic knowledge, and scientific knowledge. And you also have the practical knowledge, very hands-on, embodied. And you also have the local knowledge. You understand the local context. So how we are able to navigate different knowledge in order to make a coherent whole. And it's never straightforward. It's kind of meandering around this thing. But again, having some core values, what are you aiming for? And it's probably sometimes it's non-linear eventful. I think that is something I found it quite interesting and challenge as well.
You touched on this word in your lecture around care. And I think there's also this idea that when we use different types of knowledges, there's a sort of care that has to go into understanding and valuing these types of knowledges as well, I think. And we sort of prioritize and in a sense, make a hierarchy of different knowledges. But you sort of touch on this idea of care and the sort of Latin American principle of buen vivir, which I find really interesting as a sort of articulation of having a good life, essentially. And I think that it was the Ecuadorian constitution,
exactly.
Ecuadorians incorporated it into their constitution as a principle. So I was wondering if you can sort of, what do you think about how we can incorporate those ideas and in these sort of tools that you have, like the community community impact strategy or the health strategy, can those also be tools to subvert this logic of monetization, the financial logic, essentially? I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Daniel. I remember when we have the community impact assessment, when we finish our assessment and we have a workshop. And the workshop, one of the participants is a local resident, and she actually from Latin America. I think she's from Mexico, and she actually mentioned about, because she said the next door the development, because the assessments is to social impact assessment in relation to the next door new development about the dementia research center. And this lady said, so why we are not able to so instead of they are big giants, big development, meaning UCL research department and university. And she said, actually understanding the community health is the basic understanding of how we can provide resources, needs, infrastructure to help community being together happily. Mm. And she said that is so simple and so common sense, but we spent a lot of time, a lot of money, resources to build a big research center, big lab, and understanding DNA. She said, I don't disagree with those expenditure, but we just want to have healthy basic needs in terms of housing, in terms of food, in terms of education. How we are able, how the health can be built by basic livelihood and human needs. I thought that was, she made that comment in front of all the experts. Because she said that is all the community for. And if we get a lot of agony thinking community are not doing right thing, actually not, because we're doing for community needs, and we try to find the most effective way to fulfill our happy life. I thought that was very well articulated by a community member. And she said, I'm not a university graduate, but that is, I think everybody wants to have a happy and living well together, not only yourself.
There's a great question from Andrea. Do you want to ask it yourself, or shall I?
Yeah, I can ask myself if you want. So I was thinking, you mentioned the idea in Calthorpe of the community starting obviously more informal and then becoming more formalized. So my question was how you make sure that throughout this transition, the foundational principles of the commons are preserved.
I have to say there are different struggles, just putting this way. So in the beginning, the community organizing themselves, there's no kind of formal legal entity was set up, and but now it's a charity organization. So one of the important kind of engagement between the board members. So usually you have the board of trustees, that is the governing the whole charity as an organization, charity organization. But we make sure the user group, they can have the rep. They can present their needs, and we always have a kind of forum, informal forum to discuss all these issues. So the football people using the sports pitch, and people who grow in spaces or use the kitchen, and the older group and younger Somali community. So they all have an opportunity to express their concerns, their needs, and that can feed back to the our most formalized way of doing it, how that can be documented and can be discussed and can be negotiated. So I think that kind of spirit, coming together, trying to find a common ground, still very much the spirit of the community garden. It's not always easy, because we are actually have to fulfill the agenda from Camden, because we are the tenant. We are not own the land, so we still have the landlord, and we also have to earn money, because now the community supports the funding is diminishing quite a lot. So how we are able to find income, generate income, so-called the social enterprise, in order to make our financial viable. All these things sometimes is still the clash. We're still in the capitalist world, and how we are able to do the commons without thinking about making money. Because if we don't make money, then the whole community will disappear. So all this is quite tough questions. So sometimes people say, oh, we can do this and that, and that is slightly off our kind of social, our social dimension. But we also have to keep balance, being financially viable as well as socially engaged and political integrity. So it's the beauty or the art of balance.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the formality, because one of Ostrom's points is that in order to be in order to manage a resource in a common way, you have to be recognized by the government or whatever, the state, as a legitimate sort of commoner or commoning group, essentially, to mix the different theories together. Guillermina had a question as well. Do you want to ask it, or I'm just trying to find it now.
Yeah,
go on.
Here. I just wanted to know if you have relationship with other similar organizations, maybe kind of creating a network and spreading this idea of caring widerly. I don't know. And Rishi
Yes.
also had, sorry.
And also follow on, Rishi says, maybe even collaborating with other organizations, property developers, others who have a lot of in-between derelict land that can be made available to local communities. So this idea of what's your relationship with other organizations and
yes,
networks?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we do try within our power and capacity to work, network with other communities in London or elsewhere. So when I mentioned about the Just Space, they are doing that for the London plan, but also trying to represent the community voices, grassroots perspective. And we, me personally, or the community garden, some of the members are more actively engaging with different collaboration or networks with other community organizations. At the moment, we do mostly, there's a coalition called Community Coalition in Camden. So they are Kentish City Farm, Holborn Community Centre, or the Kentish Community Centre. So there are probably 20 plus communities in Camden. We have a meeting, formal and informal meetings to discuss issues. For example, the tenants, the lease. So we are very lucky. The Calthorpe Community Garden got the only community organization in the borough of Camden got 19 years, 364 days of the lease. So basically 1 day less than 20 years. Other community gardens, other community organizations usually only have 10 or 5 years of leases. So every 5 years, and they have to renew the lease. And also how they charge the Camden, we work together in order to campaign for the increasing rate. So the lease and also the rate, because some of the community cannot afford those increasing rate. The government, the local government, need to get their balance sheets meet the end, but the community sometimes are the victim of that increasing rate. So there are many issues faced by the different community groups, and we try to work together to have a coherent voice in when we're dealing with local council or even the bigger scale like the Mayor of London.
Thanks, Marina. And just to follow up on that, I was sort of thinking about the idea of the right to the city that you mentioned as one of your sort of anchors, but it's not only about what sort of relations are created and what sort of, we've talked about communication and forms of knowledge, but it feels like it's also how the spaces are shaped. So we talked about King's Cross, and it's obviously been shaped in this process for many years. Obviously CSM is located, and we talked yesterday about incremental forms of development as well. Which obviously Calthorpe is a great example of how over 30, 40 years it's grown incrementally. But I was wondering, like, also maybe looking more broadly at this idea of the right to the city and how we create spaces in which, for example, you touched right at the end on participation in community-led post-COVID policy responses. So this idea of what are the spaces that we can create in order to articulate and change policies as well.
Yes, I think just going back to the previous question about the network with working with other community organizations, I think we are very lucky. Calthorpe community in the city have the open green space, and people are actively involved, and we have quite a history, a long established history. So how we are able to see, if I have a dream, I would like to see the different parts of London have different community garden, and the community garden have kind of a holistic facilities and programs and the resources, infrastructure to enable them to develop their own programs. So, and then the different community can work together to in and out, as Daniel just said. So we're not only inward looking, actually trying to share our experience and our challenges with others and to learn from them. And we also can contribute as a hub. So, so instead of only one place, the city can be shaped. So the COVID, post-COVID, well, we're still in the pandemic, but we are imagine how we are able to manage our human population as well as the urban landscape. From the material, how you build space, whether, for example, if you build a social estates, social housing, whether there is a space for sports and for growing food and for playground for children, how that can be part of the planning when you have the spatial dimension, how you are able to see all different possibilities and present it to the local people, and also local people can present their ideas. Remember, Calthorpe in the beginning, in the 80s, they didn't know they want to be a community garden. They asked people, what do you want? You want a healthy center, or you want to have a playground? What do you really want to do? Or a swimming pool? So there are different creative ideas. And it's been through the kind of collaboration in negotiation and through time. So there are different stages of development. So 20 years ago, like Annika, one of the trustees, she's right from the beginning, she said, I never thought growing food would be so popular in our garden, but now it is. And so from that note, other community can start to consider. So Daniel talking about the people's plan. The people's plan is important. People are confident and competent to speak out, to organize themselves. Even that people can say, oh, it's a self-selecting. That's fine, because once you have a starting point, entry point for change, and you are able to build on that.
Mm. I really love the connection you made to Ostrom, Eleanor being a carpenter as well, and this sort of idea of craft, being
artisan,
and being part of her thinking as well, in terms of like, we have to be able to understand how we can craft these institutions and be able to craft them into the, you know, not necessarily have them permanent as permanent sort of plans, but things that can change and evolve and adapt. So I think that's really
I think what I learned from that embodies the skills, doing things with your hands. Like I learned from the farmer and how to plant seeds, how to sort it out seeds, and seeing the seeds from seedling germinated become a big plant. That is an amazing experience. And also baker, the sourdough making bread. So go home and bake. So that is a very, very encouraging act. So you are not talking about bread, and you're making it, the sourdough, the yeast, and the whole fermentation process actually is a kind of analogy, the fermentating our city, how we are able to kind of transform through the piece of bread, through a piece of the dough. I think that is very important. And also understanding our external forces actually imposing us. So yes, we have do on one hand, but we also have to challenge the bigger system, because otherwise we always individualize, and we are not able to have a massive impact. So I think the scale of change at the individual body level as well as the city level or international level through the treaties, through the trade, through different kind of policy. Because these policy and economy actually can indicate what kind of environment we are living in. So that is that dynamic procedure.
Yeah, really interesting. Sadia has a question or has a hand raised.
I had a question. Marina, thanks for your lecture. I wanted to ask, so when you mentioned about how you didn't think growing food would be so popular, and how I started thinking about during COVID, a lot of people started to rethink about how they, get their food sourced to them, and how, not everybody can be a part of the community garden, but how could we start to possibly think about growing our own food in an urban setting and in an urban dwelling? Because obviously someone like me is quite detached from how food is grown and then supplied and how I get it from the supermarket. So someone like me kind of thinking, how can I somehow embody the spirit of the garden without physically being there, but kind of thinking about how to incorporate it into my, let's say, city lifestyle?
I think there are different entry points for you to start to think from your balcony or your roof garden or a small scale, but you don't necessarily need to own a piece of land, but you can participate, try to find your local initiative, local groups. And as I said, I started participating in a small piece of land in Brixton, and that is a social housing. Now we talk about growing food in the social housing seems to be quite a common phenomenon. But back to 2008, that was very, very early time. People didn't even consider that grassland can be a growing food. And there's a lot of questions, a lot of difficulties. But once you make a case, you can either participate in the existing project and be part of the community groups, or you can start to think whether there is a new initiative you can organize, and you can get some support from friends or colleagues or local people, and doing something different. So there are different different kind of ways you're able to grow food, but don't underestimate the knowledge you need. So the growing food, you can have, just engage with planting and not thinking about production. That is one thing. If you want to produce food, actually it's a kind of more effective way. You need some knowledge and you need skills and time. So all these things are, you need to prepare to have that commitment, that interest, of course, and commitment, and try to learn from others and try to learn from other community members as well as community projects.
But I think there's an interesting point here about how you might not even be able to imagine what would be used in a space, or how the city would be used. Khadija has a related point. Would you like to jump in and say your question?
For example, I was thinking in the outside Central St. Martin, the canal, so there's a lot of boats. I was imagine if the boats on the boat roof, on the top of the boat, we have a lot of pots that can grow salads or grow little greens, and that is an intervention. I'm not saying that can produce enough greens to feed you, but that is a way of trying to unpack or unlock the obsession. We are not able to do certain things. We are able to.
Yeah, I suppose this point is, it's not, the question is, and it comes from Khadija. I was just wondering if she wanted to jump in, but I'll just read it out. Instead of developing master plans, we become networks of micro plans, etc. Thus, we facilitated development of patchwork commons, being radical on a smaller, more manageable scale.
That's great.
The change becomes cellular. And her question is, would you say the real challenge is encouraging communities to reimagine their contribution to the city? So the sort of Lefebvrean idea of like, what can we imagine that is new as well?
Yeah, I think that is very important, the reimagine or the recognition. So sometimes the community members are doing things that they're thinking, they don't really think that is special. Or they do something, so they do it kind of spontaneously. As I said, the community food bank, it's a very quick response because they know the needs of the members. So they just do it without thinking too much. But of course, that has pros and cons because sometimes the planning, as we said, is not a master planning, and different people using the space actually have the conflict. So I want to grow food and you want to have a relaxation, a beautiful garden. So how we're able to make the decision, who are in charge of that decision making. So there is not all rosy kind of road. They are at kind of difficult times. So I think that is going back to the artisan, the craftsmanship. So you are able to think when all this problem arising, how we're able to resolve them.
I don't know if it's a slightly related point, but Guillermina has a question for you about, would you like to jump in?
Yes, I wanted to know if from Calthorpe you encourage vegan or vegetarian ways of life, and where do you stand on this topic?
That's interesting. I'm vegan, by the way, so
I figured. Yeah.
That's an interesting question. Actually, in our community cafe, when it was operating, not now, it was vegetarian. It's not vegan, it's vegetarian. And it's for safety issue and for the economic reason, because it's cheaper to run vegetarian cafe. And I personally don't advocate the veganism or vegetarianism. However, underpin the idea of care for the living entity, for life or for environment. So vegetarianism is part of that ethos. So we don't kind of officially say that, but because not every community member is vegetarian or vegan, but we try to emphasize the care for your own health, as well as the planet, the environment and planet, and other forms of living empathy.
Thank you.
But I think rooted in that is a sort of ethics of care as well, and you can sort of extend it. You know, you have a care for yourself, and then a care for these various spheres of extension. Andrea has a follow-up question to the master planning topic that we touched on. Would you like to ask that question, Andrea?
Yeah, so I really like the idea of not having a master plan, but being a system in constant evolution with people's input, like you were saying that Calthorpe is. I was wondering if you think that is possible to apply this at a larger scale, or there is a kind of a maximum threshold size for this to work, or because basically Calthorpe works really well because all the people are in the same physical space. So maybe when you scale it up, you lose this kind of network of people connected to the place. So I mean, is it possible to apply the same logic of the commons to a larger scale?
Yeah, I think the previous person talking about the network of a micro scale and how we're able to how we can, instead of enlarged one site. So I would imagine the dotted line. So there are different dots, and each dot has some kind of commoning or commons as a commons organized at this smaller scale, but zoom out as a city level. So the city, the mayor of city, rather than having a master plan to dominate or to control how the city planning itself have a different philosophy or different mode of production, in the sense allowing those smaller scale commoning and commons to emerge and have the coherence. So how we are able to facilitate that at the local level, they are able to sustain themselves as a commons, and at a wider level is to provide to facilitate enabling conditions. Does that make sense to you? So instead of saying you have a centralized rule, so very decentralized, but the city planner or the designer or architect, wherever you are, actually is to able to support or enable that condition to provide the policy and mechanism to help commons to be the center. So the question is, so how the scale up is not scale up the whole city, but the scale up is a scale out. So you have many different local community and local commons, but they are able to work together. And on the level, the city level, is to oversee these different dynamics and able to support or to facilitate better connection or communication or the infrastructure in place. And of course, that is not the way we are organizing our city at the moment. So the challenge is how we're able to change the mindset for the city planner or the government, and how we're able to convince this is a new model of city development.
Yeah, I think it's to allow these processes to be happening at a very local level. And again, going back to some of Ostrom's principles around these nested hierarchies, where you have things happening at one level, and then the hierarchies are nested. And what she refers to is essentially like there needs to be an appropriateness of that level of control, which is dependent on that type of resource that you're trying to manage. So if it's a water basin of a particular river, and obviously there's thousands of water users included in that, you have essentially a forum made up of these thousands of people, but that then manage down at smaller nested levels their own community water usage, for example. So she was studying all these systems, and some systems can get very, very complex as well. So yeah. I think that can allow this kind of bubbling up of these local things, if we're using Calthorpe as our example, but we can also move out to other examples and use these as design principles. I think we can start sort of building a sense of these are some design principles that we can play with to design non-hierarchical nested systems. So
I just wanted, on that note, when we have the consultation with UCL, there's a kind of compulsory elements. UCL as a developer has to do a health impact assessment. So their health impact assessment is very focused on the global level. So the Dementia Research Institute can contribute to the public health and the mental health, the development of kind of knowledge quarter. So the notion of health is is on the global kind of academic expert knowledge level. But then the person we are caring about is the people actually live in the surrounding area. So you can see that is a conflict, because the the dynamic of a global health and public health and the knowledge production, how that can reconcile with the local people. And also the budgets, just give you a very kind of shocking budget. It's like a £300 million for a building versus how they are able to contribute to the local people's health and well-being. So you can see these are, but the mentality or the operation is very driven by the kind of global knowledge economy. And that is based on driven by the capitalist world. And if we want to have a different mode of production, so you will face a brick wall in the beginning. But how we are able to find the kind of small space to knock a wall, trying to engage with their logic, saying using the notion of good neighbors, for example, and universities should be part of community. So even in the beginning, it's a very kind of difficult conversation, but we try to find ways to tackle try to find ways to the space to find how we can have certain conversation in order to change that dynamic.
I think that also touches on a really interesting thing that you sort of raise in your lectures is around, I think really near the beginning is around the relationship between the university and us as sort of students and researchers sitting in universities and the community groups and the community groups being people, groups living around universities or in different parts of the world as well. And how we sort of juggle this relationship with the objects of our study as well as the subjects and how we, in a sense, we participate with them in our research and in our work. And I think this is something that's sort of recurrent especially in this unit when we think about community and collaboration. We're also thinking about what is our impact as researchers in the urban and our relationship to the situations that we are studying, and I think that's come up in previous lectures of yours.
Yeah, I would like to say that even we say this is a public lecture, I would like to use Alstrom's idea of workshop. So even we're in a virtual space, we're workshopping the ideas, and we are able to kind of using the artisan craftsmanship as a way to enhance or improve our skills and knowledge, as a way to be a student and a researcher and a local resident or a global citizen. And we're part of that engagement.
It feels like a learning from the classroom that has come straight from the garden, almost in the spirit of study as like, what's the spirit of the garden? I was really struck by a couple of ways of saying that the holistic process grows across scale. So the idea that it's an entry point for change and kind of drawing on the idea that it's also a bridging practice. So it's both really located in a particular garden and really located in a particular practice, but is also a case study, a test bed, a model, an open conversation. And that's the point at which the hub can also become a bridge into academia, into kind of the new institute appearing alongside you, but potentially also a transnational kind of network of governance practices and forms of collectivity. And I think the way you describe those diagrams and kind of that holistic input into your practice, but also how far that kind of that garden and the spirit of the garden can travel across the city is really lovely. Not a question, just a thought. And I guess related to that, there's the idea of there being like deliberate forms of involvement and coalitions. And then there are forms of solidarity that have to do with these spaces kind of allowing and welcoming and helping to form resistance practices that could be happening in the city anyway. And I'm really interested in this separation between, or not separation perhaps, this coexistence kind of deliberate forms of collectivity. And then these spaces also being able to be a hub for the undeliberate or not kind of not set out to do a particular thing, but becoming a channel and a bridge for growing.
I like to say, yeah, thank you,
practices.
Diana. I think what you say, the deliberation or the solidarity, it's quite important. Even a community member wouldn't using those words, but their existence actually is the very important important indication, the demonstration, how does it mean and how does it kind of manifest in their action. But at the same time, we also understand deliberation is not straightforward. There's always dilemma. There's always trade-off. There are always kind of bitter moments. It's a dilemma. So deliberation also exercise your power. So the power in many forms. So these are the things I'm being very kind of attentive, how we're able to make sure everybody has the chance, has the agency, able to exercise the agency. And seeing the picture not only inward looking as well as the world, because we are actually impacted by a lot of things beyond our garden.
Mm-hmm. I also like, in terms of knowledge flows, that there's a lot of emphasis and validity given to kind of the embedded knowledge of certain practices and these open questions and open exploratory forms of collaborating. And that in your way of studying it and supporting it, that the practice really does then allow you to test the theory rather than something coming out of academia to be placed or to sit in the world. I find that relationship really powerful.
I think that is a very kind of life experience, life experience. So I am not external to all this theory. Actually, I'm part of that. And I am inspired or shaped by theory, but I also shape the theory, because shape in the sense through my own embodied engagement or my thinking and influence or connection with others. And that is actually feeding back to my understanding of the notion of commons. And I thought that was I'm very privileged to have that environment for me to experiment or explore. And I'm very precious of that space. And that is our constant conversation. I mean, me and Daniel, because we think our research is a evolving process and a patchwork. So instead of we have a very kind of traditional, conventional way of doing research, our research is very practice and action based. Mm-hmm. And it's like a iterative cycle of action and reflection.
Yeah, and I think this the metaphor of the fermentation is very apt as well, in terms of how these ideas that we play with or experience and work with are able to then ferment other work and other processes. I think unless there's any last minute questions or last points from anyone, I think everyone's been opened up to the floor. So please raise your hand or. But I think on the note of fermentation, I think we'll end there for lunch and allow your ideas to ferment over the break and the dough rise, etc., etc. So we'll see the Unit 2 people in the afternoon. I think at is it 3 p.m.
Thank you, everybody. I hope we can have a different space for engagement.
Maybe at the Calthorpe
yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah. Just give me a shout if you want to visit us. I'm living locally as well. So I'm kind of happy to be the local guide.
So I'll thank you very much, Marina Chang, for giving us your time this morning. And it's really a delight to hear about your ideas and your work. And yeah, we look forward to sort of visiting as well in live the Calthorpe project.
Thank you, everybody. See you later.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.